Go ahead and press record, and you will now see that you are going to be basically consenting. I'm not sure exactly if we're going to be putting these online yet, but we will definitely be sharing them in other smaller trainings. So I will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Statham. I am an Indian Education for All Implementation Specialist at the Office of Public Instruction. And I am very, very, very excited to be launching our very first Deeper Dive series, which is a component of the Unpacking the Essential Understanding series. You will notice in the chat, and I'll go ahead and put it one more time here, there is a sign-in sheet. But if you also wouldn't mind putting your name and maybe where you're teaching and what you're teaching in the chat, so Jordan and Miranda can see what it is that you do and maybe be inspired to possibly, you know, have a resource particularly for you. So again, welcome. My name's Jennifer Statham. I go by the pronouns she and her. I use the pronouns she and her. I would like to acknowledge this land my feet are resting on as belonging to and being used by people for millennia that include the Blackfeet, Salish, Kootenai, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, Chippewa Cree, and many, many more. And I believe that all of you have been to at least the Unpacking Series 1, if not Unpacking Series 2, just last week that we launched. And I would like to welcome our facilitators, Jordan and Miranda. I am so excited about tonight. Take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for a little bit more in-depth things to do with IFA, and hopefully all of you enjoyed the first part of the series, and that's what made you want to join us for a little bit more. So again, my name is Miranda, and I am an IFA instructional coach for Great Falls Public Schools and a lead facilitator for Bright Trail Education.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Jordan Langford Forster. My Ani name is Bright Trail Woman. I do a couple of things in our district. I run a dropout prevention program for our American Indian students called Intertribal Immersion, and I'm also an instructional coach for Indian Education for All. Thank you so much to the Office of Public Instruction for having us tonight. We love IFA, and we are just so grateful that you guys have committed to this and are taking some time out of your own personal schedule to join us for these things. The way that we're going to structure this is a little bit different. It's obviously more in depth than the Unpacking series. So we're going to share lessons with you tonight that work for us, also model some lessons that come off of that Office of Public Instruction Indian Education webpage. We are going to, every time we do a deeper dive, we're going to do two new things as well. We are going to feature a contemporary American Indian person, and we're also going to feature a traditional game. So hopefully that will help you with some ideas of incorporating new content into whatever it is that you're doing in a way that makes sense for your students or your community. So with that, we're going to get started, and we're going to show you guys a video of the game that we are featuring tonight. The game that we are featuring tonight is Rocks in a Fist. So with that, we will get started with that video share.
All right, so as I am sharing my screen here, today's feature going to pause really quickly so I can make sure that you guys can hear, because I have to turn on a feature here on my screen. Let's see, we want to go here. Excellent. Okay, and then I will make sure you guys have sound, and we will begin. So today's featured game is called Rock in a Fist. This game originates with the Little Shell tribe of Montana, whose tribal headquarters are in Great Falls. So this game, you'll need a rock and 3 counting sticks to keep score. And the premise of the game is to use your skills of observation as well as some skills of luck, and you need a partner to play with. So I'm going to take the rock behind my back, and I'm going to exchange it between my hands, and I'm going to present Jordan
with 2 hands, and she's going to use her skills of observation to observe my face, observe my hands, see how I'm holding my hands, and try and guess which hand I'm holding the rock in. So she guesses this one, and she guessed correct. So in this circumstance, she gets the rock. If she were to have guessed wrong, I would get a point. But since she guessed correctly, she'll get the rock. And then we go back and forth. So now she'll put the rock behind her back and present me with closed fists. And I'm going to use my skills of observation, and I'm going to say it's this one. And so I'm correct, so I'll get the rock back. Eventually, if one of us guesses incorrectly, the person holding the rock will get the counting stick. Once a person possesses all 3 counting sticks, they win that round.
Yeah, so just remember that you have to be in possession of the rock, and the person has to guess incorrectly for you to get the point, and then you remain in possession of the rock until they get it correct, and then you switch. Something that's really cool and fun to do as well is I've had my students in the past decorate counting sticks just kind of as their own. They have their own set that they hang on to in our classroom, but it's just another fun thing for them to be able to do, be more immersed in the cultural aspect of this game. And you can do it however you want. For this circumstance, we use popsicle sticks, but I feel like the rocks and the sticks outside, if you want to take them on a field trip, those are free, so that might be fun.
Yeah, walking field trip to find your supplies. And this is also a quiet activity if you're looking for something students can do when they've finished work early. Once they've learned the game, this is something that they can play together quietly in your classroom when needed. Indoor recess.
I was just going to say indoor recess.
Or quiet time after work is finished.
All right, if you could just go ahead, since this is the first time we're doing the videos in this sort of way, share in the chat that you were able to hear and see everything that we were sharing along with you.
You can also use your reactions button because I have the participant list up, making sure no one's sitting in the waiting room. You can also use the reaction button down at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, and you can raise your hand. You can celebrate. I see a thumbs up. Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, so again, that is a game from the Little Shell tribe that's located here in Great Falls, Montana. Their tribal headquarters are located here. Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. And this is a game, it's a really cool game for intuition and chance. It's also a really good game to teach those social abilities of observing body language, expressions, and actions. So maybe if you are a librarian or you work in a space that is more communal, you could set these supplies out maybe on your tables or something, so visitors could potentially play them when they visit your space. Awesome.
All right, so I am going to share my screen and share with you our featured person. And our featured person for this series, I think, is really perfect for what we're going to be talking about. So our featured person is Shane Doyle. And Shane Doyle is a member of the Crow tribe and from Crow Agency, Montana. Shane has a doctorate in curriculum and instruction, and he lives in Bozeman with his family. In 1968, over 100 stone and bone tools were found with the remains of a young boy whom they were buried with. This site is near present-day Wilsall, Montana. Shane has worked with the research involving this site, and those involved have determined this boy's remains are over 12,600 years old. In an interview, Shane stated, "My ancestors amaze me. Really, all that they did and how they took care of that boy and his grave." We thought Shane was a great contemporary American Indian feature because his work displays the intricate and sophisticated levels of Indigenous society pre-contact. To find more information about Shane, we have put some things in your resource folder. OPI has several great lessons that go along with his work. You can certainly search Shane Doyle or the Asnick site or the Clovis boy or the Clovis child. You may have heard those phrases before. And Shane had a video interview that he wanted to share with us. And I've also inserted that into the resource folder for you to watch at your convenience.
An important message that I think goes along with Essential Understanding 1 and 2 and the work of Dr. Doyle is his work really exemplifies the scientific ability of Indigenous people to understand geology. Those tools that were buried with that young boy were very sophisticated tools. In circumstances they took hours to make. They weren't just tools that, were struck together and, oh, I have a tool. They were very sophisticated tools. And so it really demonstrates the scientific knowledge of Indigenous people. And it also really demonstrates the love that they had for this little boy, that they left all of these items with him when they buried him. They buried him with a lot of care, and a lot of time went into that. And so I think it's a really great reflection of civilization of the time. Even 12,600 plus years ago, these people had an understanding of scientific knowledge, but also family and the importance of family. And I think this is just a really great story. So if you're interested, I would really encourage you guys to search more about that story. It would be a great article for some of your students to read, and a great message as well. All right, so we're gonna go into a live activity. Oh, yes, we can. So just search more information on Shane Doyle, the ASNIC site, or Clovis Boy or Clovis Child, and you'll find a bounty of scientific articles that have been published about him. Also, I want to apologize. Our side of our video was lagging too. We just want to make sure that everybody understands rocks in a fist, and it wasn't lagging on our side really, really bad. You could still hear the explanation. It was just the video was kind of stalling. So we want to apologize that. I just saw that some people mentioned that in the chat. All right, so now we're going to move on to a activity, and it will explore other ways that imagery does not promote diversity, imagery that we have access to now, similar to the Google search that we did last week. And this activity, what we'll view, it really suggests that all tribes are the same. So in a moment, we're gonna send you guys to YouTube to watch a classic clip. We will watch the clip twice. So after you watch it the first time, we'll come back here and discuss it in the chat, and then we will watch it again a second time. Please don't close out of this Zoom meeting. Just open another tab on your computer and make sure that you're still on mute. When you go to YouTube, in your search bar, please type in "What Makes the Red Man Red." The video that you're looking for is 3 minutes and 28 seconds long. So the first time that you watch it, pay attention to what you see, what you hear, and how American Indian people are depicted in this clip. So we're going to give you guys about 4 minutes to do so. When you start coming back in, can you let us know in the chat that you've watched it and you're back in? This isn't a quiz or anything. We just aren't quite sure how much time to give everybody so that they're able to do this. So again, YouTube, "What Makes the Red Man Red?" And it's the 3 minute and 28 second video. And just be mindful of what you see, what you hear, and how American Indian people are depicted in this clip.
If you have access to the chat, the link is also in the chat. You should be able to click the link and join watching that YouTube video.
Okay, we're gonna give just a couple more moments for some folks to finish up in case they haven't. And then we will discuss. If you're back with us now, can you please respond in the chat what you saw, what you heard, and how American Indian people were depicted? You can respond to all three of those prompts or just one, but what did you see, what did you hear, and how are American Indian people depicted in that clip?
So as people are rejoining us, you can put your thoughts into the chat, what you noticed, what you saw. Really appreciate everyone that is able to participate in the chat. We thank you for providing that input. We're hoping that as we move forward through these deeper dives, the information that you share with us is just as valuable for your learning as it is for each other's to share and create this community of learning together. Seeing a lot of great responses.
Yeah, we really appreciate these responses and this interaction. So this clip is something personally for me. I've watched this clip, no joke, probably 100 times, and I am constantly noticing new things that I've never noticed before. And so I would encourage you to watch it several times. We are going to watch it here again in a second, but some things that we have rolling in the chat are the stereotypical feathers, the yelling, the screaming, really portraying a lack of civilization. And also we have in the chat the pan-Indian identity, and that's what we refer to as this idea that all tribes are the same. So there's a mix of symbols, there's mix of symbols on teepees, there's mix of symbols on drums, and those symbols aren't even really accurate, but they have kind of a western, a southwest, and a plains and a coast feel. There's teepees and totem poles. Totem poles are really not of a plains tribe who would be living in teepees. Those are mostly coastal, particularly Salish. But this idea that every tribe use all of these things, this appropriation of these cultural markers that are just lumped together. So again, that pan-Indian identity. I want to take a moment to look at the words in the song. So we're going to share the words of the song on your screen right now, the lyrics to What Makes the Red Man Red. I'm going to take a couple moments just to reflect on those and discuss in the chat, what does this say about language? Because these are the American Indian people in the song who are singing these things. So if you don't see it on your screen, that's okay. That's okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what makes the red man red? So just take a couple of moments to observe the type of language. I know some people have responded in the chat observing the language themselves. The language used in this song is not accurate. The Hanumanaganda is not an accurate portrayal of any actual words or any way that American Indian people would provide a culturally relevant song. It's really just a chant. So they're not even really using words, but they say things like, why does he ask you how? When did he first say ugh? Why is the red man red? We have the usage of the word engine. We also have the usage of the S word. What I can tell you about those two terms is the I word is the equivalent of the N word today, and also the S word is the equivalent of the C word today. But here we find it in a children's song, in a children's movie. It turns out that if you go back a million years, the first maid kissed a young Indian man, and he was so embarrassed that he turned red. And we had people also reflect in that chat that dehumanizing usage of that red color, because I know that I'm human and I know what I look like, and I know that my skin color is not that skin color. And so if I'm human and I know I'm human, what does that make the other groups of people that are viewed in this clip? All great conversations. So someone also mentioned that it's unfortunate that this is still shown today, and it is, even though it's an older movie, it's still featured. So today we have Disney Plus, and this is one of the films that is featured on Disney Plus.
From the vault. And one of the things that they've started doing at the beginning of some of these older films that have been recolorized and restylized to look a little bit newer, is they're putting kind of a disclaimer at the beginning of the video saying that some of the things in these movies are not necessarily reflective of the brand. But we know that kids aren't seeing.
Yeah, a lot of times if you're first, second, third, I would say all the way up to high school student, you might not be taking the time to really read and reflect on the information that's shown to you before you start your exciting, colorful sing-along movie. So we are going to watch it a second time. We're going to have you guys go back to YouTube and watch it a second time. We will come back and debrief on that, and we will just talk about, did you notice anything new that you saw, anything new that you heard, any different portrayals that you noticed when you watch this film. So again, what makes the red man red over on the YouTube channel. Make sure that you're on mute, please, and we will come back in roughly 3 minutes and 28 seconds and discuss any new observations that you might have had.
As folks are returning back, I just would like to remind you to, if you haven't already, please make sure to sign in the sign-in sheet. Here is the link in the chat. And if you see your name there, it's because I put you in there because I don't have my trusty Joan Frankie this evening, who usually keeps track of important attendance features. And so if you see your name, then you're good. But if you would like renewal units, which is what teachers need to get their teaching licenses renewed in the state of Montana, please make sure you do sign in that list. That's our official record keeping piece. And also, as you rejoin us, in just a few seconds here, I will put the resources link. It will be the same for all of the deeper dives, as well as all of the Unpacking the Essential Understanding series. So if there is anything that is mentioned in either of the sessions, I will make sure that it is in the resources list. So make sure to check that for each of the different essential understandings.
So as people are re-entering from watching the video and doing all of the attendance things that you need to do to make sure you get credit, please also make sure that you are taking the time to put in the chat anything you notice different that second time through. Like Jordan said, we watch this a lot, and we do pick up new things all the time. Again, thank you for participating in the chat. We really appreciate the conversation that is happening.
Yeah. So right as you guys went to watch it the second time, someone also mentioned in the chat that they think this, having watched things like this, might lead people to believe that the tomahawk chop is okay now. And that's exactly right. It's this perpetuation of a warlike culture that seems to continue throughout our imagery. And the characters definitely do speak differently, which really is a demonstration of their level of intelligence. You have that broken English or that gibberish. For whatever reason, the young boy is smart enough to understand exactly what the chief is saying, but the chief is having a very hard time communicating with Peter Pan. So some common Western themes that we see in those Western movies too is the damsel. A moment before that scene started, Peter Pan had just saved Princess Tiger Lily, which also speaks to intelligence, that American Indian people weren't smart enough to take care of themselves or take care of their own people. They always need that white savior or that non-native to come in and rescue them. So we get the damsel, the lack of civilization, how the boys began running around and acting crazy the more time they spent with that tribe. The princess is very sexualized. So not only is she misusing the drum by dancing on it, but she's also dancing for Peter Pan, which is a very obscure thing to have in a children's movie. These two individuals are seen as adolescents, and it's very obscure to see the young girl dancing for the young boy. Also, the idea of an Indian princess is a stereotype in and of itself. What happened is when colonizers came over and began interacting with chiefs or leaders of the community, they had just come from a monarchy system. And so if you had a chief or a king, someone who was in charge, presumably, of a tribe or a group of people, you assumed that that made their whole family some type of royalty, and that wasn't necessarily the case. So the idea of the Indian princess is also a misnomer. The inappropriate use of the headdress, I want to talk about that. So they appropriate the headdress and they use it inappropriately because the chief takes it off of himself and just appoints Peter Pan to chieftainship. And to reach that level of adornment, you have to, depending on your tribe, you either have to earn it or you have to be, that has to be passed down to you, a headdress. You have to do a lot of work. You have to achieve a lot of accolades to be able to own a headdress, either amongst the individual or within a family system. And Peter Pan was just so important that the chief just gave him a headdress. And I really do believe that that's why people today feel like it's okay to wear headdresses to sporting events, or we see them a lot on Halloween, because you can just wear them, anyone can wear them, and that's not culturally accurate, it's not culturally appropriate, and it really steals the valor, it steals the importance of what headdresses are intended for and whom they are intended for. So this imagery affects our bias, right? It affects our bias, and because it's not just in Westerns, it's not just in the Google search, it's in our children's movies. So what does this mean for children who are watching it for the first time? If they have no other access to culture or accurate representations, what does it mean for these children who are watching it for the first time? What types of things might they think? We would invite you guys to engage in that conversation a little bit in the chat before we move on. But these are all really important things to be thinking about.
Yeah, I was noticing a couple of other observations that were coming in as Jordan was speaking that were really talking to the points that she was making about those skin colors that are demonstrated, pointing out that Tiger Lily is of a lighter, more palatable skin tone, more humanizing skin tone, and those subtle nuances are very important to our understanding of what's happening, because even if we can't verbalize, like even if our children can't verbalize what that means, they know inherently kind of that person's human, that person's not, this is why, and one of those things has to do with that fire engine red skin tone or a more human kind of skin tone.
Right, and I'd just like to reiterate that I am speaking on behalf of myself. No one has the authority to speak on behalf of all American Indian people, but I personally have a hard time. I struggle with the argument a lot that people give me about these sports teams or costuming or whatever, honoring. We want to honor you. We want to honor you. Well, in that statement, you are elevating yourself now to the level of importance of Peter Pan, and you're just saying, I'm so important that I get to put this on. And as we discussed in the Unpacking Our Essential Understandings 1 and 2 last week, that it's really difficult for children to navigate that, but also it takes a lot of achievement and a lot of life's work to be elevated to that status. And I don't think that an outside group should be able to dictate how another group is honored.
I also appreciate that comment of understanding that there's lots of layers problems here. We're obviously dissecting what it means for American Indian people. There's also layers there in gender norms and kind of what that looks like for children and what they learn to be true about their genders. I also wanted to point out, I saw some conversation going on about some lesson plans that OPI has, and we did put several featured lessons in the resource list for you. One of the things that we encountered is we kind of had to pull back a little bit because it would be really easy to put all sorts of lesson plans in there, both from OPI and other resources, and we didn't want to overwhelm you. So if there is something you come across that is specific to Essential Understanding 1 or 2, you will find those when you're navigating the IFA website. Know that we just picked and chose a few, but that there are plenty of resources out there other than the ones we will be able to share with you in our time tonight.
Okay, well, thank you so much for participating in that activity. I would encourage you, if it's appropriate for your class, to also maybe critique that clip with your class. For younger students, it might not be appropriate to show them that clip, but you could show them pictures, when you start asking them, what do American Indians look like? What do Indigenous people look like? And they start saying that, you could show them pictures of Peter Pan and say, oh, so you think they look like this? Well, actually, and then present them with a contemporary image as well. So different levels to incorporate this in whatever makes sense for you. We're just here to try to be helpful and offer you guys some tips and tricks.
Yeah, in terms of translating that kind of upper level activity to little kids as well, when you show them that imagery and they kind of start to recognize that that's not something that's okay, it becomes like a game. You're going to get a lot of students giving you a lot of references that they see in their cartoons or the shows that they're watching. My son is constantly coming to me and being like, Mom, look what I saw. And it's something that's perpetuated still in lots of episodes of shows that they have access to via TV and streaming devices. So we are going to share with you our next short video. This is our introduction of some vocabulary. So throughout these series, we are going to be talking about vocabulary that's pertinent to the essential understandings. So this one is for essential understanding number 1, and then we will come together at the end.
So this is the vocab that we would like to share with you, the vocab that we feel is important to essential understanding number 1. And it can be used as flashcards, or you can use a word wall. But the cool thing about these vocab words that we're going to share with you is that they should already be words that you use in your regular curriculum. So it's not that you have to introduce whole new concepts, it's that you can use the standards-based words and just take them a step further and talk with your students about how they are applicable to tribal nations.
And all of these words are able to be geared up towards upper level classes or simplified for our lower elementary kiddos.
Diversity. A way that you could say this to younger students would be different or variety. Tribes differed in location, religion, histories, government, language, traditions, and beliefs, just to name a few.
Montana's 12 tribes: Salish, Kootenai, Pend Oreille, Blackfeet, Crow, Northern Cheyenne, Chippewa, Cree, Little Shell Band of Chippewa, Assiniboine, Sioux, and Gros Ventre. It's important to remember that these are the government names assigned to these tribes, and you can, in your classroom, share the spellings and the pronunciations if you're willing to venture into that with the different language apps. But the names that they called themselves would be different than the names shared here.
Civilization. This constitutes a functioning society. It's important to remember that all tribes were civilized and demonstrated aspects of civilization pre-contact. That includes a government system, social hierarchy where everyone has a job, economy, religion, and written language. Imagery and literature, also pop culture, create a narrative that Indigenous people were uncivilized.
Pre-contact, before Europeans moved to North America. So when we think of this, we want to think about how Indigenous peoples created fully functioning societies and were existing a long time before 1492.
Tribe. A group of people made of communities and families that share values, cultures, and life practices. There are 12 sovereign tribes in Montana.
Sovereign, separate and independent powers. Tribes before European contact and through contemporary times have self-governed and have been recognized as their own separate powers. Sovereignty looks different for every tribe and has been challenged by federal policy put in place by the government.
Those are just suggested vocabulary pieces that you pull out to support the understanding of essential understanding number one. You don't have to use them. We're not saying they absolutely need to know this, but a lot of those phrases and a lot of those words should be a part of your curriculum already. So that's just a way that you can incorporate what it means from an Indigenous perspective when you're sharing those words with your classroom. And again, I would suggest flashcards to maybe pull out when you have some extra time in class or indoor recess. I know they probably don't, now that I suggest that, they probably don't want to do flashcards during indoor recess. They probably want to do a game. But I also have a word wall in my classroom where if we have extra time, I just point to a word and they tell me the definition of it. And it's just a great way to keep that conversation going all year long.
Yeah, one of the things that you'll find as we're going through is that these things are really supporting your understanding of essential understanding number one and number two. So remember coming back to those documents that have them written out and any key concepts that you will find helpful to teaching those in your classroom. So now I'm going to share one more video with you. I'm sorry if this is lagging in your time. It's interesting to me that the video and the sound aren't both lagging. So we will continue moving forward and see if there is a fix for us for next time.
An example of a lesson found on the OPI website is called Identifying Stereotypes and Countering Them. This is found under the Social Studies tab and it's for grade 4. It's applicable to more grades than that. I always like to say, you know, even if you're teaching to high schoolers, if it's new information that they haven't had before, it's grade level. It's new information, it's stuff that they don't know. But I really like this lesson. What I enjoyed about it when I went through it was it asks really great questions. So, you know, these beginning conversation questions that you can have with your class, like, you know, what is stereotyping? What is bias? And then how do stereotypes affect cross-cultural understanding, which I think is really important, and it's a really important learning outcome for our students. I kind of tweaked it a little bit. I kind of went off script, imagine that. And I kind of added my own little twist to it. So I would kind of, you know, just to get them going, just to start thinking, I might start off by asking the class first, you know, what do Native Americans look like, and take notes and maybe make a list. And you know, you're always gonna get those feathers, teepees, stuff like that. And then I think it's really important also to explain to them what a stereotype is. And I didn't find it on the lesson, but what I came up with just for my own self, especially if you're working with younger kids, you know, a stereotype is when you take one idea and apply it to all. So a stereotype for apples might be that they're all red. If you have only seen a red apple, you might assume or guess that all apples are red. And that's an example of stereotyping. You're taking one idea of something and applying it to all apples. You don't even know about the green apples or the weird yellowish ones. You know, and then ask them a deeper dive question. You know, what if you're wrong about something? What if you get your first ideas or your biases about something and it's not accurate? What are the consequences of that? Could you possibly be wrong? And that is what some of the Native Americans looked like, but not all of them. So revisiting maybe that list that you make on the board and say, you know, some of these characteristics did and still do exist, but not all of them. We can't stereotype. We can't take one idea and apply it to an entire race of people. Something else that I really love about this lesson is that it stresses the fact that every person is an individual, and that's an important understanding to take away from this activity. What it asks students to do is to create a written portrait of a present-day member of a tribe. I would suggest, you know, that's kind of, it's a little vague to, okay, because when you do the Google search, you're gonna find certain pictures and they're not really contemporary. So what I would suggest is having a student do a profile on the individuals who are featured in the Making Montana Proud poster series. That would be a great way to start, a great place to start. Any contemporary American Indian would work. That's just my suggestion for simplicity. And the idea that American Indians live in the present is so important, articulating the ability to adapt and grow, just like everyone else. Please stress what contemporary American Indian people are doing currently and articulate how they contribute to society. And you'll find that information too on those posters. They're available on the OPI website. And the students can do a report with facts and maybe a drawing. I know some of those guys from that poster series, and I know that they would love nothing more than a picture of themselves drawn by a very small child.
In addition to the lesson that Jordan was just describing, another lesson that you can find resources for on the OPI website is talking about the tribal seals on the tribal flags. And you can have students look at and analyze the different symbols and the words that are found on the flags, the colors that are found there, and they can analyze what those mean, why those symbols might have been used, and how they're different from each other, kind of highlighting the uniqueness of each tribe. And you can take that in a couple different directions. You can look at that from an art standpoint, but you can also look at that as enriching some of these other lessons we've been talking about highlighting the unique differences in our Montana tribes.
Thank you guys for bearing with us. Apparently also tonight we're practicing the oral tradition of listening, because as long as the sound isn't lagging, that's really where the message at. You don't need to, although I really am enjoying the still shots of us where we're like, so that's been fun. But really we're getting into the oral traditions now. We're going to talk about it more with our Essential Understanding 3 and the deeper dive, but I'm glad that we could softly get into it tonight.
I actually do have a place we can order that from. I don't know it off the top of my head, so I will be sure to add that to the resource file. Tomorrow when I'm at work, I'll ask my secretary where she has ordered those from, because they are a great resource to have.
And if you go to the Tribal Seals lesson on the OPI website, you can print them out as well.
Mm-hmm. Really great resource.
So, thank you guys for your comments and stuff. I didn't know about yellow apples for a very long time.
It is a good metaphor for what we're talking about, though, because kids really understand when you put things in terms that are things that they have experience with. That's certainly the best way to teach them new information, because a lot of this thought process is new information for what they're learning.
I was very, very surprised.
All right, so we are going to have one more little video here. Let me pull that up.
Remember, it's oral tradition tonight.
And this is an activity that we do with our students, and we have shown different ways for you to do that for upper level kids and elementary kiddos.
So something that we think is helpful for students as far as visualizing these concepts that we're talking about, and really coincides with Essential Understanding 1, Diversity Among Tribes, is a visual like this. You don't have to hand draw it on your board either. You could project it onto your board. Your classroom might even have maps. So this is just something that we'd like to go through and just allow our students to visualize what's going on when we talk about diversity among tribes, especially with that misnomer that all Indians lived in teepees, and this is a great way to do that. So you can talk about different homes or housing for tribes. So we have the Plain tribes with the teepees, we have hogans, we have pueblos, earth lodge, wattle or daub, wigwams, longhouses, and really have a conversation of why do these houses look differently? Well, it's based on resources. What do you have around you that's able to build your home with? You can have a conversation of climate and region. So, you know, it would make sense that we have some lodging made of ice and other stronger structures where it's colder. It's colder in the Northern Territories. On these coastal tribes, you know, they're building their structures, their housing with log and timber because they need to protect themselves from this wind coming off the ocean. Down south, where it's warmer, they're not going to be using the same resources as these other tribes because they're going to have different needs based on their climate. You can have the same conversation about animals as far as resources. So are all of these tribes just only hunting bison? No, we have fishermen on the coast. We have hunters hunting other animals in the plains. This can go anywhere, but it's just a really good activity so students can visualize this concept of why all tribes are not the same. Essential understanding number 1, diversity among tribes.
So another way we can utilize this concept of talking about housing and highlighting the differences among our 12 tribes in Montana and among the tribes in the United States is we can talk about these with little kids by making interactive things such as this worksheet. All I did was take some clip art from the internet, bring it together, and make it where my students can cut out these houses. They can follow along, maybe if I have the map on the board like we just showed, and we can talk about different things. Younger grades, we can focus on things like shapes. What kind of shapes do we have here? Looking at our math standards. We can talk about location. We can talk about resources, as Jordan was explaining earlier. So after I've walked through talking about these different types of housing with my students, they might end up with something like this, which is a representation. We can come back to this. We can talk about, remember when we were discussing how tribes are different, like they have different housing. We can pull this out and remember the different topics that we came to discuss and kind of help us as we're enriching our learning along the way.
Okay. So so a couple of things. We'll get to a couple of the questions that people are having. Thank you so much for the feedback. We're loving that. In that video resource we just showed you, talking about the ways that you can utilize maps. Maps are a huge part of several different standards all across grade levels, and it's a really great way to talk about diversity in tribes. That worksheet that I'm showing, demonstrating, I made that. I put that in your resource folder so that you have access to that as part of attending these classes. You may access that in your participation folder for the essential understanding number 1 and 2, so that hopefully if that is of interest to you, you can use that. You can also use that worksheet for higher level grades because they can draw on it. They could write notes to themselves about the resources you're talking about, some of those different aspects of where they're located, and they could write out those names of those housing options there.
And all of those images of those houses and the sun and the tree and the wind, that is all free on clip art. So we just went on to clip art and got those images because it's kind of a bother to figure out where we got images from if they're not our own. So we just went and got those on clip art. So you could expand that if you wanted to have more images on yours. That's just an idea that we wanted to provide with you guys.
And then in terms of these videos, having access to these later, we can certainly see if we can add those to the participation folders as well, so that you could rewatch them and re-visualize what you were learning there.
There was a question that I wanted to respond to. I didn't see it the first time, and I apologize, but there was a question concerning how we feel that Disney should handle this in 2021. I think that there's 2 options. I think that we dissipate that certainly there's been more Peter Pans made since that time that I think would be fine to use, but in terms of that, they could either stop showing that altogether or they could take those clips out, because I still think that the movie would work just fine without that derogatory American Indian imagery in that film.
Yeah, great question. And thank you for re-asking it. Sometimes when we're speaking, so note to self, if we don't answer a question, feel free to put it back in. When we're speaking to you guys and getting our screens shared and stuff, sometimes those zip by and we miss them. Now we are going to be looking at another featured OPI lesson. All of the lessons that we're featuring tonight will be in the resource folder on that list so that you can access them really easily with a click of the button. We will come back and debrief.
So another lesson featured on OPI's website, which you can find in their classroom resources in the Social Studies tab, is called Differences Among Montana Tribes, Cultures, Traditions, and Government. And it says that it's for grade 4, but this really easily could be introduced at any grade level, well up into secondary, because it is a great way to talk about how our tribes are different. But they're also going to be picking out some similarities, which is important to create commonalities among what they're learning. So the things that you will need for this lesson is you're going to need to find a Venn diagram. It's not provided for you, so I just got a Venn diagram, and you're going to need to make a research checklist. And this research checklist you can really make unique to whatever you want to focus on with your students. So in this instance, it asks you to pair your students off. Maybe for COVID purposes, you might have individuals do this, and they're assigned a tribe. And they have to do some research. They can utilize different resources. You might coach them through what would be appropriate, maybe directing them to tribal websites or using the OPI Montana Histories book. And they can find some basic information. So on the research checklist I made, they're finding the tribal name, what the reservation is called, where it's located, their tribal headquarters, and tribal language. The other things that you might include would be some resources that they have based on their location. I included a section where students could pick 3 other sets of information that they found interesting, and you could give examples for that. It could be enrollment, it could be the tribal flags, as we talked about earlier.
Current events.
Current events, contemporary issues would
And now
be a
that
great idea.
Now that I'm thinking about it, this sounds important. I remember also in the social studies content availability, there is a link to all of the newspapers that are produced by these tribes.
Which would be a great resource, because as we've talked about in the web series that we're doing now, there is some dangerous places to look up information, some misleading, looks trustworthy but isn't trustworthy. So it's really important that you're guiding students to finding information that's true and accurate. This kind of lesson you're really going to need to set up for students. There's some things that they need to know beforehand. Depending on how young you're going or how much you have introduced this kind of language in your classroom, you might need to talk about what a reservation is, what traditions are, what culture is, and what is a tribe. And so those things are important to set up before you start having students research. And then the fun thing I think about this lesson is it asks you, after students have done some research, to pair them up either in small groups or in single pairs, and to compare and contrast what they learned. So you might have students who have been assigned the Blackfeet Reservation and a different student who's been assigned Fort Belknap, and they're going to find some things that are different about their tribes based on location and some of that other information that they learned, but they might also be able to fill out some things that are similar. And I think that is a great way to talk about the uniqueness of our tribes while finding some commonality.
It's a really effective way just to model teaching to the I share, you share, we share. Students listen to each other, in my experience, way more than they listen to me. And so I know that when you have a person the same height and age as you, you're really excited about what they have to tell you.
Exactly. So you can take this as short or as long as you want after they've had a chance to share and fill out the Venn diagram. You could take it further where they make a poster demonstrating what they learned about their tribe. So a great way to really bring in some standards from some different core classes and research and enrich using IFA.
So one of the things that I think is great about that lesson is that it's really structured in terms of, sometimes we've talked about teachers feeling a little scared to get going on some IFA lessons because they might not know enough information to lead an activity or enough background information if they have questions from students. And that lesson is really a great diving in point because it's very structured. It's something that you guys as teachers and students can learn together. Maybe you could even participate in filling out some of that information so that the students can see you demonstrating that modeling as well.
Yeah, during their research, they can talk about landmarks, or maybe rivers, historic sites within the reservation boundaries or within tribes boundaries and outside the boundaries. It might put it in better context for them. Like, well, I don't know where Crow is, but I know where Billings is. And research towns, often on reservations, maybe towns that they have never heard before. Same thing with counties. Any way you would like to incorporate this.
Yeah.
So, okay, also just a quick apology. Miranda has said, like, for the past 3 clips, we just have one more clip to show you. And
I've been lying the whole time.
she's a liar, but we hope that you know that we're trustworthy at heart. We didn't mean to lie to you. I've just been an accomplice to these lies this whole night. This is the last clip that we have to show you.
For real, for real. This is a short introduction of vocabulary for essential understanding number 2.
Diversity. Again, this can be explained as different or a variety.
Individual. Talking about one separate person or an individual identity.
Identity. Who a person is.
Contemporary. The present time or existing in the present. American Indian people exist in the present.
No generic. The way I explain this to my students is that, if you're in the store and you see a generic brand, that's a copy of another brand. But no generic means that there are no copies. Everyone is a different person. Everyone looks different, believes different things, draws their own conclusions, lives in different places. No one is the same.
That is the last clip.
That was really the
we have to
last
show
clip.
you.
I would like for you, before we move on to one of our 2 last activities we have before we are clipping right along through our time, is in the chat. I would like you to kind of reflect and respond. Some of these things that you've seen in these videos, the lessons that we've been presenting and sharing with you, what is something you can see yourself using or adapting for your classroom? Give you a couple of moments to respond to that, and then we'll be moving on to a new activity.
And if it's crap, tell us it's crap. Don't lie to us like we've been lying to you apparently all night.
Using the map in your classroom. Thank you for providing this feedback in the chat. It's one of those things that sometimes when Jordan and I are sitting down to plan how we're going to present or squish all of the information we have for you into a short amount of time, it can be overwhelming because we feel like, are we picking the right things? Are the things that we have to share with you the things that make the most sense for you? So I'm glad to see that a lot of those resources are going to be of value to you. There's certainly a lot more out there, so it's hard to pick and choose. I am going to share my screen so that you can see the cover of this book. So one of the books that we talked about last time is We Are Water Protectors. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to utilize this book in your classroom. And it is something that when I was thinking about how I would use it in my classroom, I have a background in elementary and a background in art. It was kind of overwhelming to think about the possible ways that you could use this. So I'm going to talk about some of those ways because I think that'll be helpful to those of you that are in our group here that are from a variety of places and backgrounds and grade levels. So obviously we are focusing on essential understanding number 1 and 2 in this particular webinar. So we have diversity among tribes and diversity among individuals. This book easily touches on those things. If you have not had a chance to read this book, I really highly suggest you get your hands on a copy of it. It's beautifully illustrated. One of my biases when I'm looking at books is being drawn to illustrations. It was recently a Caldecott winner for its work and how beautiful it is. And if you don't have access to or can't get that book into your classroom, there are read alouds online. I think there's even read alouds from the author reading it herself. And so you could share it that way. But when we're looking at essential understanding number 1 in diversity among tribes, this is a tribally specific book. The author is Anishinaabe, and the story has a traditional story intertwined, talking about her people's story of the great black snake that might be coming through and destroying the lands. The illustrator really focused on that tribally specific content as well, taking some of those floral motifs that the Anishinaabe are known for and having a lot of those design elements be a part of it. So you have excellent opportunities to talk about the diversity among those tribes. And in terms of diversity among the individual, we have a single contemporary character featured here. But it shows diversity within the book. There are several instances of her showing family members. There are community imageries there, and it really does a great job of showing that everyone looks different and is different as being a part of the community, of being part of being considered American Indian. And so those parts and those points are really important to the work. So I'm going to breeze over really quickly so I can show you the activity that I came up with for this, the way that these touch on the other essential understandings, because that's something that you're going to find is there is a lot of overlap anytime you're trying to plan. You're not going to just be specifically teaching one essential understanding. When we think about culture being represented as contemporary, this is a contemporary issue. There's language represented in this book. There's Anishinaabe language. We have words like Miigwech and Nokomis for grandmother and those kinds of things. So featuring those things for students. It's talking about land and preservation of land, being good stewards of the land, being good stewards of water. It's talking about some environmental policy. It's talking about federal policy. We're touching on including different perspectives. That's a big piece for essential understanding number 6. Thinking about how history is told. This is history that's unfolding contemporarily, and including those different perspectives for your students is very important. And then lastly, it has effects on sovereignty. That might be a way you would go if you were focusing with some older students, talking a little bit more in depth about those kinds of issues. So the activities that you can do with this book really could be compounded. You could really do some kind of unit-like work surrounding this book, or some single lessons, depending on what works for your classroom. I do want to point out, and I added the link to the resource list, that the author, Carol Lindstrom, is one of the creators of the activity kit that comes with this book. So they provide, I can't show it big on your screen for copyright purposes, but when you go through and look at that resource, it has a letter from the author and the illustrator. It has discussion topics. It has ways that you can talk about this with your students depending on grade levels, and it has some activities provided along with it, talking about how we as individuals can be water protectors. And so sometimes we have people concerned about the political side of talking about water rights. And certainly that is something you can present information on, but you don't have to go that route. You can talk about it with Earth Day. You can talk about it with science, water cycles. Where are we being good stewards by taking care of the amount of water we use, for example? So one of the activities that I came up with that I would do if I were using this in my classroom is talking about the artwork within. And this is a great way to feature diversity and to feature individuals. So I have a piece of artwork here that I created as an example that would be a great way for us to talk about the kind of media used. We have watercolor being used here. What is that connection to the story? I would take students through a collage project. So this background is one piece of paper, this middle ground is one piece of paper, and the foreground is one piece of paper. So I'm going to walk students through the book and stop and talk about imagery. That is a big piece of what we've been talking about throughout a lot of our activities. What is being portrayed here? What's the message? Who is this story about? And so you could take a lot of time to go through that. I used crayon and watercolor as the way to, sorry, it's backwards in my screen. I can't tell which way to go. Crayon and watercolor to demonstrate that kind of really beautiful imagery that you see in the book. Anytime you're doing a project with students that is art related, that is also IFA related, it is very important that you are taking inspiration from the work you see and not creating your own things like appropriation. We don't want to create our own symbols, or we don't want to create our own teepee designs, for example. We're taking inspiration from the work. So we're taking inspiration from the color and the line work and the patterns in this book, and we're not copying those kinds of things. So there are a lot of directions you can go here. I think it's really important. The imagery that I came up with in the center would be to promote individual diversity, is for students to be able to talk about why water is important to them. So in my example, I have a potted plant. You might have a group discussion about how water is important to your students, and depending on the age level, you're going to get a lot of different answers. So one of the things that's important to me about water is that I am a plant person. That is really important to me, makes me feel happy. It's good for my home and the air quality. And so that might be one of the reasons that water is important to me. So I made that as part of my piece. Why water is important to me. And you're giving students the opportunity to share their individual identities, what they think, how that is important to them, and really touch on that quality of the book. And you could compound that with other books as well, really making a unit out of it. So I hope you find that to be interesting. Lastly, before we move on to our concluding activity, I want to just talk about a couple other core areas you can incorporate this book. You could take this for science and talk about water cycles, talking about maybe depending on the age level, you could really take this into contemporary issues and talking about what are the consequences of oil leaks or spills into fresh water. What does that mean? You can investigate the carbon emissions question that people are presenting about if there is a pipeline. What does that mean for, do the carbon emissions go down? You could talk about stewardship of the land and how we take care of the land. In terms of current events, you could really have students research what they see going on in the world based on current events and news articles, researching scientific articles with that, talking about water rights, how other groups might be experiencing similar issues with water safety, for example. And then in terms of ELA, this book is considered lyrical nonfiction or creative nonfiction because it is a nonfiction topic and it's written in that way. So it's a really beautiful way to incorporate poetry into your classroom. I think it's kind of hard to find nonfiction examples of poetry and persuasive writing. They could talk about their opinions on the matter. So lots of options when thinking about this book. It is an award-winning book for a reason. So as we Oh, you have that.
Yep,
Okay,
we're gonna
sorry.
move on to our last activity or just idea to give everyone tonight. I made something too. Look, it's like Miranda made this and then I made this and it's like, oh, wow, they're both artists, right? There's absolutely no difference in the level of skill here. Anyways, we are going to move on to the last, hopefully helpful piece. How do we remember this? How do we remember this ourselves, or how do we want to teach it to children? And this is just something that I use in my class when I have them recall the 7 essential understandings. So we have 1, bun. 1 rhymes with bun. In this case, hot cross bun. So that is our symbol. The summary for essential understanding 1 is diversity among tribes. The reason a hot cross bun is our signal or symbol for EU1 is because a cross today is associated with religion. And then I have my students explain how they would tell other people about diversity among tribes. And so they might say, well, tribes differed in religion. To teach religion, tribes spoke different languages. Tribes lived in different locations, so they have different resources that affect their practices and traditions and beliefs and governments. Also, because tribes have different locations and practices, they have different histories, homes, and different uses for things. So 1, bun, hot cross bun.
It's really amazing how quickly I get to see Jordan's students on a daily basis. They really pick up and use this information. And I quite frankly have started using it in my mind when I'm doing things. It really does help recall that information.
2 symbol or signal is no to. The summary for essential understanding 2 is diversity among individuals. How do we explain this understanding to others? I ask my students. Individuals differ in appearance, beliefs, location, and experiences. There are no generic American Indians, just like there are no exact copies of anyone. A lot of differences and ways we explain this to others can be interchangeable for EU1 and EU2 as far as how tribes and individuals differ, but that's just the device that I use for my students. And then I also have them create these flashcards. So it has the essential understanding and then whatever number it is. And then on the back, there's a section for symbol, summary, and how would you explain this concept to others? And they take those out every once in a while and quiz each other. And so once they remember it this way, then we have them cover up one side and they remember it another way. And that's just an effective strategy that I use for them to really retain this information. I don't want to give information to my students that they're just going to forget the next week because we're moving on to something else. This is a conversation that we have throughout the year. Eventually they fill out a sheet like this and it has all 7 essential understandings with their symbol or their way to remember it, the summary of it, and then also how do you explain it with others. And by that I mean, if you are having a conversation with someone who might not know, or you have someone says something that you know it's not true, how are you going to recall information and explain it to this person as a way of education? I also ask my students, hey, is this something that you could teach your kids yourself? Are you comfortable with that, explaining this to your children of your own someday? And they say, yes, we are. And so anyway, that's just an activity, a way to do it. 1, bun, 2, no to.
So as we come to a close this evening, we want to ask you to reflect in the chat. How are you going to explain diversity to students? The crux of both of these essential understandings is talking about diversity. How are we going to stay away from selling our kids this pan-Indian identity that is so often portrayed to them in books, in film, and in the things that the learning tools around them? So I would like you as your exit question to talk about how are you going to explain diversity to your students, maybe activities that worked from tonight that you really want to take to your classroom. And then if Jennifer has any closing remarks or directions for our participants, we can also have that as well.
I do, and I will say a final thank you once we get some of the comments coming in and have a bit of a discussion about those. But do notice in the chat there is the survey link. Even if you're not getting renewal units, we would love your feedback. We really do read it and take it to heart. So please make sure to fill that out, but it will close tomorrow afternoon. And there is also the link to the resource folder in case you are on your phone or you are not able to access the internet right now. Please do bear in mind that all of your reminders, letters that you received the Monday before have the sign-in sheet link, which will close as soon as we are done here. The feedback link will also be on there for each of the deeper dives, as well as the webinar series that are specific to each one. So they'll be, make sure to open only the link that is in the letter for the session you are attending, as well as the resource link is also in all of these in your letters. So multiple ways to get the information. And again, we'll close it out here after we discuss a few of these, and I will say a final thank you.
So as we have some people putting some really excellent resources for each other, some ways that they're going to take the information they've learned here today and really talk about diversity with their students. I also wanted to just have up on the screen for a moment our contact information. Feel free to email us or visit our website if you have any questions or comments later on after our webinar series is concluded. You can certainly gather information from us there.
Absolutely, yeah. And so we would just like to suggest to when you're vetting resources, to stay away from resources that have the word phrase all tribes or all Native Americans believed. Make sure that it's tribe specific or location specific. So what I mean by that is, so a commonality among Plains tribes, that's location specific. And then also maybe redirect conversations in class. So if someone asks you a question that overgeneralizes a group of people, say, well, some, but not all, and this is why. So it's also important that we're redirecting conversation to also foster that learning and idea of diversity.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation this evening. We hope to see you again as we go forward all the Wednesdays to come. And we really enjoy having these conversations. So thank you so much for participating.
Yeah, thank you for spending your time with us.
Well, thank you both so much for your contribution. I'm so excited about the rest of the workshops. If you were excited tonight and you think someone else should sign up for the next workshop, please make sure to get that registration information off of our website from the PD tab or from the featured resources tab, or email me and I'll be happy to email that out to you. So or if you think they could benefit from our Unpacking the EU series, we're only on Essential Understanding number 3 next week, so it would be great to have as many folks as possible join us. Thank you, Jordan and Miranda. This was very engaging, very exciting to see the rubber meet the road, so to speak. And I just thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. And I'm so excited to read your feedback and excited to see you all again. Thank you and have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.